Buenas noches, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well, blessed, and enjoying family. As always, muchísimas gracias to everyone for everyone's words, wishes, prayers, and the love and care you guys extend my way. From the heart, gracias. Well, to get into the story on hand, I want to continue off where I left off on my last story, right? To conclude with the homies from Planton 14 and just give it a little closing, right? And like I stated before, being under Papa was a tricky thing. What I mean by this, if it wasn't for he said, she said, or surroundings that with Flaco from Harpies, just certain angles that I personally seen regarding Papa's workers, I would not have not one thing bad to say about him, right? He was a different individual. What I mean about this is, you ran across him as a camarada, but you weren't directly underneath him, right? You showed respects. He was humble, respectful. You know, I heard him a couple times joking around with camaradas, He wasn't what you would think right behind the scenes with his own workers. But I guess it goes with territory, right? For some reason, plays out like that time and time again, which is an individual gets power to whatever sense you want to take that to, even as a camarada, and they start going after their own neighborhood, people they grew up with. It's just, I don't know why it plays out like that, but it's usually the case, right? Well, that's how Popeye was, Usually you could say strict with his workers, he didn't tolerate nothing. And same with the Emmett, right? He didn't like his carnales to tell him anything either. He liked to run his ranfla, period, the way he wanted to run it, right? But he was entitled to get another carnales business. That was a big issue with him, right? He felt he had that coming in being superior, being above other carnales, right? Anyways, getting back to Ironwood and Trippy and Scrappy had done that. They went to the hole and unfortunately, instead of pushing Papa's agenda on the yard and whatever, 50, 100 bucks, whatever it may be, it was nothing to Papa. But then again, you're using his name. You have to bring something, right, to the table. And he dealt with them, right? Again, to them, it's considered taking space, and it's a common thing that you hear amongst when you're in shoe living is, he's just taking space, remove him. And nevertheless, again, when I got informed, I respected the homie Popeye from Clanton a lot, right? He had a good mente. He was older, right? He's been around, done his thing, lifer. So, anyways, he's done his share, so he had his clecha, right? I was in a position of responsibilities, but I was still wet behind the ears. But I was smart enough to always keep them antennas up, right? In the sense of learning from older homies that been there. Basically, I took what I say here to take from my message, right? Which is what makes sense to you. What didn't, I threw it out, right? And pushed on. Then the day everybody's gonna have their own experience, right? And nevertheless, again, he got in his feelings, right? It was his homeboys after all. And a lot of things played out on the yard. For example, after he was informed, we were already back on the yard, and numerous things happened, right? For example, he was real close with the homie Spanky, from 18, East Side 18. They were tight, como uña y mugre, you could say. And, Papa was a hustler. He flipped, but he was good at it, right? And there were certain individuals as myself that provided love to him, right, in that sense, for him to make his feria, and of course, touch base with his pili. Again, it's never wise, but you guys know how I am on respect. Everybody's entitled to do their program, the way they please, right? And but he was hurt, so he never spoke on it, right? But you could tell he was trying to distance himself from Popeye. Now, what I said on the last video, Popeye from Harpies, he was one out of many that were smart. After all, you gotta remember, they're there holding a position of being a pili, and they stood in the hole surviving, right? And a big sense of power, not for being dumb, but for being good at what they do. More so to know who's on the yard, the repercussions of whatever action they take on a camarada that's underneath them or against another pili, their reactions, they're whatever, right? They're there for being smart, period. Now on this yard again, there was about after tripping Scrappy, they took off. I say about other four other homies besides Popeye, right? That were answering to Popeye. I remember a homie from Wild Bunch and Nido from Harpies. Well, there was four, right? And Popeye tried to distance himself from Popeye without saying so, right? Nevertheless, Popeye being Popeye again, he's there for a reason, right? He started noticing it. For example, by shooting kites to his other workers, right? Hey, did this yard slow down? There ain't that much jale, just little things as fishing. Why? To the sense to get the feeling why things slow down with Popeye, right? In the sense of receiving. And of course, the yards was still functioning to the fullest. So, nevertheless, there was a worker from Popeye, right? Like I mentioned, the homie from Wild Bunch. Not gonna put him on blast because he's still doing his thing, right? As far as I know, he was on the yard and basically you got a material straight from Popeye from Harpies. And in the material there was a bundle directed just for the homie from Clandon, which was for him to do his push, right? To start getting his things together, make some feria, and start tightening up the ropes when it came to reaching out to Popeye. I know it's a bit confusing because of the placazos, right? They're both the same, but anyways. And for those that were in Ironwood around this time, you guys know what I'm referring to, right? It's a time supposedly, quote unquote, the jale was good. That's what they said, right? Again, I never, but Popeye, he gave his road dog a paper, or I don't know how much, right? Spanky from 18 to get high, and unfortunately the material was bad, and they ended up pulling him out of 2 block, right? He ended up ODing and passing on, right? And homeboy was already in his feelings, so what he did was definitely painted a line, right, between him and the pili. What I mean by this is, he thought just fading out without saying anything was gonna be tolerated. He was a lifer, so he started programming. He kept doing his program, but he wasn't moving material no more. And if he was, it was for a little bit of canteen here and there for a sale, right? Nevertheless, Popeye from Harpies was fed up, excuse me, that he had everyone reached out to them, including myself. That's how I sat with Popeye and had this conversation on, what's going on. You're, you've been around longer than me. The consequences of promises, right? Again, I go back to the last video, right? A lot of people get out the shoe with a lot of promises, even if it's just, removing somebody from the yard, right? That's kind of what we're seeing right now. What I mean by that is there's no more shoes, right? But now there's people that are getting out a lot easier. And since there's walking amongst Billies, they get out with promises. And I say this in a personal tip, right? Because I'll just say someone I knew as a kid. He did his thing, went in, did his time, about 15 balas. Was never involved, just whenever it was required. The minute he went on his time, he decided to go near a Billy and make a whole bunch of promises when he got out. And tell me, sometimes it's true what they say, a fish dies because of his own mouth. You never know how the streets are going to be after 15 years, right? Are you going to be able to get them done? And then for what? For that cloud of getting out to your neighborhood and say, oh, I got palabra. And start striking, basically having that veterano look amongst younger vatos that don't even know you. Let's be sincere. Our neighborhood, but after 15 years, new generations pop in. You get out and whatever you did don't mean anything. Don't know you. And promises breaks careers. Anyways, we sat down, played dominoes, and we discussed this, right? I told him, he's trying to reach out to you. You gotta understand that you're not gonna lose. I don't know what was spoken amongst you and him, and it's not my business, right? But whatever you were getting out to him is sitting in the shoe. Anything hits a nerve back there, right? Because you don't let go of nothing. You know, when you're on the linea, you're walking, you're doing your wiggles, there's a lot going on. In the shoe, you got an agenda when you program. You get out, and believe me, you remember every angle, every yard, every worker, XXX. And if that was the case with me, imagine a Billy, right? Anyways, he confided me that day, right, that he wasn't happy with what had happened with his homeboy and that material that got sent by Popeye from Harpies ended up causing a few losses on the yard, right? And that included whoever pushed it had at least one loss on the yard, right, by somebody. And what hurt him was his road dog, right, Spanx. He was at that age, you know. We all reached that age where you just took it for so long, right? You seen it where it really starts hitting a nerve. And what was hitting a nerve with him was that you can't say nothing. For example, me as a camarada, bringing a material I guarantee is a good holiday, whatever, right? I push it on the yard, reach other workers last they did, and it caused losses. Every death slowed down the program. Every day brought less money to the table. You know, a lot of people, for example, Spanx and Iseli, Iseli got rolled up. So, well, you guys get it, right? You can't say nothing. Why? Because it's coming from a Pili. Sureños, we can't ever question one of their movidas, right, wrong, whatever. You have to buck up. What I mean by that is if open up our feelers, right? We hear someone on the yard speaking ill about that case, go whack them. Why? Because he's defending the Pili's pride. We're wrong as camaradas as well, right? 'Cause we're just, at least at this point, you know, we're co-siding that they're in that position of God, right? Can't be questioned. Remember, they could dictate our program. You can't question theirs at all. Even when, remember, there's been a couple of bad decisions already when it came to Papo that he took personally. His homeboy, and now this, and you know, homeboy did what he had to do. What I mean by this is Papo sent out palabra through Terco, right? Which is through myself, because I was his mouthpiece on the yard. One of them four workers that had put that material out there, which is the homie, right, I mentioned, had to get hit and removed. Now, when this circled the yard, you know, I'm in agreement with the conversation me and Papa had, right? One, as a lifer, you should be ready to ride at all times. At the end of the day, DA receives all he has live, whatever, double live. Nah, what's the point, right? The most of the time they'll turn it down. So when this came out, Papa came to me and he told me like, hey, I want to do this. Again, he was in his feelings, right? For one, he's gonna hit Papa Soldado and defend his road dog's pride, if you want to call it that, right? And at first I told him no, camarada, you're here for a Pili, and different angles are required, right, for me to take when it comes to this, instead of a lifer that's just programming, right? But he kept insisting, right? Anyways, it came to the point where it got okay. So Papa went, he did his movida, and of course, you know, in the yard they got busted. They went to the hole. In the hole, remember, Papa was in his feelings. He wasn't producing no more money. Dope. This vato, even though he pushed wrong, whatever, Damapila came back, this was just a get right. He had to do it because basically somebody had to be in the wrong because of the material being bad. And it wasn't going to be Popeye's name, right? So the homie from Wild Bunch took the punch. Nevertheless, it wasn't supposed to go to the extent that Popeye took it from Clanton, right? Supposedly. I think it was just BS from Popeye from Harpies to, he was fed up that homeboy didn't want to even reply back, per se, right? And he had Popeye from Clanton jumped on the concrete yard, or the fence yard, excuse me, in Ironwood in the hole. But again, it was a get right. And again, the homie was fed up. He was a lifer. You know, when lifers come on here and they say, you know, or you guys ask me to say about a certain lifer, he did this, and that to get out. You know, I could never knock that, right? I knocked the part that a lifer that did what he did to get out. and gets out and still wants to act like he was Juan Diego in bicicleta, right? Still, that's what I don't agree with. But anyways, Papo did what he did. Afterwards, he did a lot of promises, but I'll just say they were never met because he decided to do his life in prison in a whole different angle. That angle we always talk down on, right? Which is them yards. And up to date, I don't know if he ever got out or what. He went to that side, and but it goes to what someone asked me recently. Is everyone on the SNY a piece of trash? No. There's a lot of camaradas on there that never did dope. Just decided to be faithful to somebody that eventually took a dive and took him with them. That's one. Politics at its finest. And just camaradas that laid it down, right? That were crossed one, two, three, four times, whatever, by that person you were doing everything for. And you were put in a spot where you couldn't even say nothing. And then like this, you go do a pegada for him. And then the one that gets regulated in the hole is you. You can't say he's trash, right? I would never say Papa is trash from Clanton. He was a good homie that just got fed up. Again, Popeye the Harpies had a funny way with his workers. But it goes with a lot of Bealies, right? When it comes to his workers, there's just no love there. But I'll finish this story by saying this. What I want to open up the glance to in this, or the message to be in this, is again, you can't bring personal stuff into prison. What I mean by this is, do you see the reaction of having a road dug on the yard? You ever do that? You never know if it's you or him, right? You hold dearly a person from your neighborhood. You don't know if he's going to be able to maintain with the program. You bring personal stuff. Sorry I say it like this. You have to detach yourself from whatever street thing is, right? You gotta always know inside that that person you're on their yard hugging on, saying, hey perrito, let's do this. Vamos pa acá, carnal. And might be a person that mess up and you're gonna be the one to move on. Loyalty's out the door. You see how many times it played out with Popeye? Homeboy got fed up. He just got a regulation to him. But it don't usually play out like that. Usually when a Billy reaches out to you and you don't answer, are means for you to get whacked. Straight up. But anyways, it goes back to, loyalty. We're on the streets, we always get lied on how inside it's ranflas, right? Loyalty. Carnalismo. Nah. Loyalty, you have it with those you grew up with, and not all of them, but there is carnales there, right? After all, sometimes you go back with them to kindergarten. Loyalty should be with family. Don't get lied to. Stay true to yourself and loyal to loved ones. Buenas noches.